Welcome to the Foster Friendly Podcast, where we come together to make a difference in the lives of children in foster care and the families who care for them. Foster Friendly communities are part of a nationwide movement by America's Kids Belong that helps people from all walks of life take action and help kids and families thrive. You'll hear from former foster youth, foster and adoptive parents, social workers, faith and business leaders, and other experts on how to engage in meaningful ways. Our hosts Brian, Travis, and Courtney explore inspiring stories of everyday people making a difference in foster care where they live and work.
Hello, Foster Friendly community. I'm Brian Mavis.
I'm Travis Vongsness.
So that's how you say your last name. Okay, this time. Travis. So I'm excited about our guest today. It's Britt Kelley. And Britt, she is a teammate of ours. And just a fantastic advocate for youth in foster care and foster and adoptive families. She's got kind of that magnetic connector quality about her. But the thing that we were wanting to focus on today and what gives her kind of a unique authority is Britt is a former foster youth alumni, and we're going to be focusing today with Britt on teens in foster care. So Britt, welcome. And why don't you start with, first of all, before we go into the heavy, deep stuff of teens in foster care, just tell us a little bit about yourself today. Who are you? What's your family life like? That kind of stuff. What do you like to do?
Yeah, thanks for having me here. I live in Colorado, right at the foothills of the mountains.
That doesn't suck. No,
no, it doesn't. There's plenty of trails out in the community. I'm still in a metro area, but just so much nature to get out into, and that's one of my favorite things to do. I'm married. I have a husband who puts up with me, and four kids four boys actually, and I put up with them. So I'm always busy, but if we can get outside in the Colorado mountains, that's what we're going to do. Yeah.
Well, we love having you nearby. Sounds like a pretty good life you got right now. So, yes. Britt, as I just said to our audience, let them know you are a foster youth alumni, and that's kind of the verbiage they use. How old were you when you entered the foster care system?
I don't know the date that I entered into the foster care system, but I know that it was like days after I turned 16.
Okay, so you were older foster care or kind of a foster youth, but Travis, you looked up a little bit about the number of teens in foster care. What have you discovered?
Yeah, it's really, it kind of surprised me, because if we know that, nationally at any time there's around 400,000 kids in foster care, there's kind of some statistics around saying at least up to 35% of kids in care are ages 11 and up, typically up to 18. Some states it's 21 to age out, but yeah, so 30. So if you think about, 30+% out of 400,000, that's a lot of teenagers.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of teens and they're considered typically, and I think unfairly, hard to place, whether it's placed in foster families or if they need permanency in some other way. So Britt, let's go back and look at you just turning 16 and being placed into foster care. Go back a little bit before then. Tell us a little bit again what you feel appropriately transparent to share, a little bit about that season in your life, and maybe it was years that you want to cover and summarize, and then about what it was like to actually go into foster care.
Yeah, I think when I was born, my parents were married, and I don't think their relationship was as strong as it could have been, but they ended up getting divorced before I remember them being married. I can't remember a time they weren't divorced, and I spent a lot of time with my mom, primarily with my mom, and I'd go on the weekends to visit my dad, and that was my life for a long time, and I was very content and happy in that. The split households, the shared time with different parents, and things were good. Um, I had a lot of family around me outside of my parents. I have a blended family, so my father was married prior, and his previous wife, who he had children with, was a big support in my life growing up, and she would, always be there for me as a motherly figure.
Mm.
And as life progressed for my parents, things got a little rougher for them. My dad became addicted to drugs. My mother was in unstable relationships, and eventually my mom met my stepdad. We moved to Colorado. I live in California. Um, and that's kind of at that time of my life. I was in about first grade, so about 6 years old. That's when things started to just kind of shift, the precipice, if you will, of
Mm.
coming to Colorado, being separated from my dad, but it was at that same time he went into prison. So I didn't have a support system from my father. I had a new father figure in my life, my stepdad,
Mm-hmm.
and my mom, and we were separated from any family when we came here to Colorado. So that's when things started to change, where I had strict rules. I had a lot of abuse and neglect that I would experience. And that was, at the age of 6, and it went on until I went into foster care. There would be like periods of time in my life where, things were kind of status quo, they were normal. Maybe in my eyes they were a bit normal, where I was like, well, I'm not getting in trouble that often. Like, I only get grounded for this or that, or I only, get punished for this or that, but it's not really bad. And then there were moments where it was some of the worst times that I remember in my life, where I would get harsh punishment, where I would experience the abuse, but that it wasn't only physical abuse. A lot of the abuse I experienced was emotional abuse, and so that is what really like ate away at who I was as a person, by experiencing just language over and over again telling me of what my value was, and it wasn't a high value. And what I was good for was to help around the house and to do the chores and to be quiet and not to be bothersome. And then if I pushed those limits, then I would experience physical abuse. And so I guess that's a whole decade of having, if you
Mm-hmm.
think about 6 to 16, it's a whole decade of experiencing a lot of hardship.
Did that feel to you like this is what normal life is like? This is what all kids go through, or did you sense like something's not right?
For a long time, I thought it was normal. I would say for years, I thought it was normal. And it wasn't until I was able to spend time with friends. And oftentimes, if things were good, I'd get to go to a sleepover at a friend's house, and I would do everything in my power to make that sleepover like lengthy. So I
Mm.
might, ride the school bus home to a friend's house on a Friday night, and I would be staying until, a Sunday, um, just so that I could, have that freedom, that sense of freedom. And I kind of realized through observing other families and observing, maybe saying a few things here or there, and getting reactions from people of like, oh, this doesn't happen in my house.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Getting that understanding that like things aren't normal.
Hmm.
When
Yeah.
I became a teenager, I would say that's when I started realizing that this is not, this is unjust, and this isn't something that I should have to deal with. And I was becoming more of my own person and more understanding more about myself as I grew into my own personhood as a teenager that I started realizing what is happening is wrong.
Hmm. Yeah, and then just like I'm trying to imagine, I mean, and having been then going into foster care, like that experience of the entry point, the day, the removal, however all that looks for everyone's story that plays out, but specifically as a teenager then, I
Mm.
mean, just with how the insecurity of being a teenager, and I mean, it's just a crazy vulnerable time. So then to on top, now you're entering foster care. I mean, what was even memories around like that going into care?
But when you're, experiencing all these things and realizing like that they're not right, your natural reaction, well, my natural reaction was that, it was something to be ashamed of. Like I was ashamed of my family, I was ashamed of
Mm.
myself, and entering into foster care was a huge relief that I felt this pressure, this suffocating in the house that I was in. But when I left, that weight came off of me. I appreciated the being removed from my home and being, placed outside of my home. But with that caveat of it was a good thing for me to go into foster care, but I felt so much shame that,
Mm.
I'd already understood that like I was a bad kid, right?
Mm,
And that's how I thought that I was because that's what I was being told. And then this is not right. This is not normal. And I don't want anybody to know about this. I don't want
Mhm.
anybody to know that I'm in foster care. I don't want people to know that my family is jacked up. Like,
mm,
I don't
Mm.
want anybody to know about it because it's embarrassing to me.
mm,
And it's a grief as well. Like you're experiencing this active grief when you enter into foster care. And if you don't know how to process through that, I mean, I can't say who would know how to process through that
right.
by themselves. You do the best you can to get rid of it, suppress it, ignore it.
Mm,
That man, that is so good and good for I think prospective and current foster families, adults to take a moment to put themselves in your shoes and in
mm,
a teenager's shoes, a youth, no matter their age,
mm,
and feel that, feel the shame and the mixed emotions of relief, but also now you've got this new situation that also feels um, not natural.
mm,
Um, Britt, I really don't know. We've talked a few times, but I haven't really got into this. And again, I want to respect um, your boundaries on transparency. I don't know. I mean, did you go into a foster family that was healing and nurturing and safe, or was it not a good experience? What happened when you were in foster care? Did you get bounced around? Did you stay in one place?
And I was removed at night. And so the night that I was removed, I was able to go stay with a friend.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually a friend who was over 18. And she was the one who called the police that was the catalyst for me being removed. So I was able to stay with her for a day, but for some reason, my family got to dictate where I would go. So I maybe you would call it a kinship placement, but it wasn't kinship because I was a friend of my parents, a single dad, and with two teenagers, brought me into his home. And so I spent a couple of weeks there, but he traveled for work. So I was left alone with two other
All
teenagers.
right.
mm.
Um,
Sounds great.
they definitely enjoyed not having a parent around. So it was kind of this, okay,
Hmm.
this is where I'm at now.
Hmm.
And, you know, there was definitely a sense of freedom that I felt when I entered into foster care, but then I also didn't have control. And I didn't like that I didn't have control. And I also just was once again like, this isn't right. Like, they shouldn't get to say where I'm going. And this is like not a good place for me to be.
Mm,
There's people coming in and out of this house. And so
Hmm.
I advocated for myself. I didn't talk to a caseworker. I didn't actually know that I had a caseworker, but I told my friend who then made sure that she advocated for me and told them about the situation I was in. So then I was removed from that home. And I don't know how long I was there, a few weeks, maybe a month. I
mm.
was moved into a foster home, a nice family that lived about 45 minutes away from where I was attending high school in the same
Oh,
county,
wow.
but I was in the mountains, so it took a while to get from one place to the other.
Yeah.
And they were a nice family. They were very kind. But I didn't spend a whole lot of time there. I spent a few months there, and that really wasn't enough time for me to get to know them,
Hmm.
for me to form any bonds or attachments. They had two children that were originated in their family, and then they had a boy that would come in and out. So when I came from the foster care system, so when
Hmm.
I came in there, he was not there. I was sleeping in this one bedroom, and then he came back into the home. They moved me to another bedroom because he was going to be a little bit more permanent there, and they were like, "This is his room. We want to give him his room back." So that was good to be there, but it was a strain on me because I was in after school programs. I was in the school musical. I needed to get late night practices, and it's 45 minutes away. I'd have to wake up super early to get to school. It was not ideal, but in that time that I was in that foster home, my friend who was over 18 who had um called CPS,
Hmm.
which elicited my removal. Her dad, who I was close to that family, those were one of the families that I would go and stay. Like in the summer times, I'd stay like
Hmm.
weeks if I could.
Cool.
Over the school year, I'd stay like all weekend if I could. And so I was close with her family. So her dad got a certification, a kinship certification, and then I moved into his home, and that was the last place that I was in.
Okay, so for our listeners who may not be aware, this idea of a kinship certification, this might be considered a non-traditional kinship, uh, because kin, you typically think of kin as being relatives, aunts and uncles and grandparents. So there is this space in foster care where it's sometimes referred to as non-traditional kinship, and that's somebody who's not a traditional relative, but they have a relationship with the youth. So it could be a coach, it could be a friend's parents, teacher, bus driver. I mean, just somebody who's got a relationship. So, and a lot of times, that really helps with that transition because you're not living with somebody who's a complete stranger that you're trying to know. Um, so, Brett, again, for our listeners, would you like no matter the age? I mean, you were a teenager, but if it was a youth that was younger or whatever, it are there like what would you say would be what makes for from a youth perspective, what makes for a good foster family and I'm going to put it in two parts. What makes for a good transition into a foster family, like the first few days, the first week that would um, be helpful to a foster youth, and then more long term, what is a key characteristic of a foster family that would be good for a foster youth, no matter their age?
I think when you enter into foster care, it's chaotic, it's traumatic. You might not remember things. So I think it's important that you establish the rules of the house, or not so much the rules even, but like, here's our food. here's where this is, here's where the towels are, this is the bathroom that you can take a shower in. Feel free to do that whenever you want. Here's our pantry. Feel free to grab a snack whenever you want. Here's some ideas. Giving that permission of like, this is for you, this is for you to use. Go ahead and use it. And then continually reminding them of those things in a good way. And even with room rules, like, hey, we like to eat, or room rules, but family rules, like we like to eat dinner as a family. So in the foster home that I lived in, we ate dinner as a family every night, and that was something that they did. And I think that's important to have those regular times, whether that's eating a meal together or something else that you're doing that is the word I want to say is it's predictable. It's getting together. It's with the intention of building relationships, getting to know each other, just chatting. It doesn't have to be deep. It can just be eating, a meal together, but having those regular rhythms and having this clear understanding, especially not knowing what rhythms that child had prior to coming into care. This is what we do. We sit and we eat dinner together. We try and do this every single night, or we try to do this as much as we can. But continuing to reiterate those values of your home, the rules of your home. It doesn't have to be like, hey, you're not allowed to do this and you're not allowed to do that, but just reminders of like, hey, we all try and clean up after dinner together, or we really like it when we can get our laundry done on a certain day. Like, I don't really care what it is, but the familiarity with the house, knowing that, repeating it, making that child feel welcome. Like, this is what you can do. This is what you can do. And then having those regular rhythms in the household that can really help form a sense of belonging in that house.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, where you feel, like you said, you feel like you belong. You're not the foster kid. You're a part of the family. I also appreciate, just from our own experience, your encouragement to keep reminding. It, as foster parents, we were learning like, oh gosh, kids in foster care, they're in survival mode, and like they're right now just entering in information on kind of the most important need to know basis. So they're literally, you could tell them something, and they're telling themselves, is that necessary for survival in this moment? So you might be surprised that you said something and they don't remember it, but they're having to be really do a lot of triage as far as in their own mind of what matters and what doesn't matter. That's really good stuff. And I hope our listeners who are doing foster care embrace that encouragement to have those rhythms and repeat those rhythms so that kids feel like they belong. That's so good.
Yeah, and I think too, like, back to the predictability part, I can't help but always think of part of the difficulty that kids in foster care face is that there's so much uncertainty swirling around their life. Like, am I going to go home? Am I going to get bounced to another foster home? Am I going to get switched schools? Like, everything seems like it's always in flux. So there's something you're saying powerfully about even just internally in the walls of a house, creating stability, predictability helps even shore up some of that just swirling uncertainty that must just feel so like out of control and scary. So, yeah. So moving kind of forward on beyond, really helpful insights you shared of just a general, these are the traits and maybe things that make a good foster parent. What about as a teenager, and what kind of things do you feel like maybe teenagers might need differently, or may that we look at differently with teenagers versus younger kids or whatever?
Well, I did study child development in school, but I don't remember a whole lot about it. I might be getting this extremely wrong, but I feel like I was talking earlier about like kind of growing into my own like personhood. Like I was finding my identity. I was finding out who I was, what I liked, what I didn't like, and what I wanted for my life, right? Like I
Mm-hmm.
feel like as a teenager, you're really kind of moving towards adulthood. You still absolutely are not ready to be an adult, still get it wrong along the way, but I believe that it's some of these experiences that we have as teenagers that help kind of form us into the adult that we're going to become.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, as a parent caring for a teenager, I think it's helpful to help them navigate through that sense of coming into their own self, you know, making decisions for themselves, but also helping them navigate through the decisions. So I believe that youth in foster care should be a part of the decision making
Mm.
of their life. Um, but I also believe that they shouldn't have the last word all the time, that they should have people pouring into them, helping them just look at what are the options of that decision that we're making. And let's see, do you want to change schools? Like, let's talk about what that would mean. And let's talk about the goods and the bads. And let me help ask you questions as a teenager to help you kind of have a better informed decision, and that you're not just, I mean, as a teenager, I knew everything, and I just like everything
Mm.
that I wanted to do was right. It
All
was
right.
what I should do. And really needing people to help me navigate through the decisions that I was making that led to, you know, the trajectory of my life and where that was going to go. So I think it's important that we help the kids in our care as teenagers really navigate through these major life decisions and the minor life decisions, but let them be themselves, embrace, you know, their likes, their dislikes, learn about what they like and dislike, so that you can level with them better and just better understand where they're coming from, but helping be a sounding board for them to help make educated decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Really helpful. And it reminds me, another former foster youth I had talked to one time had talked about, and you already kind of mentioned this, but this idea that advocating, teaching advocacy also involves bringing them in on it. So though you might be, and this is very true, they said for teenagers was, well, you may be doing a killer job advocating for them when they don't get to see and be part of that process. For some kids, they don't even think they're worth advocating for. When they then are part of it and see you do it with them, it's also showing them, hey, I do matter and I can stand up, for what I want or that was
Mm-hmm.
so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and as a teenager, you know, I looking back, I don't want people to let me cannonball into my decisions. Like, I want people to help me, you know, oh, is that the decision that you want to make? Well, before we make that final, let's walk through it. Let's talk through it. Let's process it over time. You know, major decisions don't need to be made at a split, you
Mm-hmm.
know, like at the snap of a finger, but really instead of having kids cannonball into those decisions, saying, I hear you, let's work through that. What does that look like?
Yeah, I love that. I think too, adults can be better for at this than teens, as far as helping them think through than the the like some preview of coming attractions. So if you do this, here's what we can expect will happen down the road. How's that sound to you? And so
Hmm.
yeah, as adults, helping them think through um, what 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 will come of those decisions, and then tying them to you've brought this together as well, Britt, tying those decisions to their identities
Hmm.
of not just this is what you do, um, but this is who you are. And so,
Hmm.
and does this decision um, line up with the kind of person you want to be?
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
Britt,
and
let's go as we begin to land this plane with a question I know you've been asked a few times, uh, and that is, what would you tell 16-year-old Britt Kelley in foster care right now? If you could go back, speak to her, what would you tell her?
Well, a lot of my abuse stemmed from this concept of not being worthy, of being worthless. Um, and so if I were to chat with her, the 16-year-old me, I would tell her that she is worthy. She's worthy of all um, the love that she deserves love. She's worthy of the time and commitment that other people put towards her, that she puts towards herself. Um, I would encourage her to love herself and to love the people around her that are trying to help her. Um, yeah.
That again, I want our listeners to know that that's Britt's unique story and unique message, but I think it applies to so many kids. And so I would take what she said and I would assume that that's something that your your teens that you're caring for need to hear as well.
Hmm. And lived out to do. As we kind of bring this thing to a close and last thoughts or comments by you, Britt, one report I had read, this is a bit dated, so things are kind of in flux with new legislation in a good way of changing, getting more upstream, more resourcing bio families and kind of getting ahead of things. But it wasn't very long ago that at least by 2019, 58% of teens in care were not even living with only 58% were living with a family compared to 95% of kids 12 and under. So that just shows you the disparity of fairly recently, again, some of this is changing, the amount of kids that were then teenagers were not even with a family
So they were in
because
like group homes, is that what
they
you mean?
were in group homes and they were probably the ones more in emergency settings and child welfare offices and stuff like that. But wow, does that show you like the nature of needing more foster families, of course, but needing more foster families to step into the space, the what's perceived as for some a scary space of being a foster parent for teenagers. That's just, horrifying numbers. So messages and, kind of that's been the theme of this episode, but around calls to action to people listening that how can we engage specifically, whether it's being foster parents to a higher age range that we thought maybe, or, any other things that we want to say around that.
Youth who've experienced foster care have a level of empathy
Mm,
different than a child who maybe had a neurotypical upbringing without any experience of trauma. Um, they really have a connection to a deeper level to other human beings. They have just this fierce love for people who are vulnerable and need help. And if you had a moment to talk to a teen in foster care or a teen who'd experienced foster care, it it doesn't take long after a conversation to realize, especially when you ask them, "What do you care about? What gets your heart stirring? What is it that you find unjust?"
yes.
And when you hear the things that they say, then you're hearing, "Wow, like you're a really cool person." And when we can have adults come into their lives to nurture that person, to help heal that person by giving them the support that they need, the encouragement that they need to find healing through the trauma that they've experienced, then they can kind of develop into this person that kind of not only has this great sense of empathy for people, not only has this great sense of caring for people, but then it can help launch them into being that person in their community that's helping others, that's influencing the people around them in a unique way. So while teenagers are annoying with their slang and their attitude from here to there, like honestly, when you look at who they really are, as regular teens, but especially these teens that have experienced foster care, you know that there's more to it. And so don't look at the scary, don't look at the unknown, but instead look at what it is that's hidden deeper, and how can you help nurture that.
No, Brett, that is beautiful. And
Yeah.
I mean, that is a great message to end on. And also just say to you, I mean, what you just said about them is so true of you. I mean,
Mm.
you've taken the bruises, the line I like is God uses our bruises,
Mm.
um, and you are a very caring, empathetic person, and you've decided to use that. Though, in as Henri Nouwen says, you become a wounded healer yourself,
Mhm.
helping heal others.
Mm.
So grateful that we get to work with you, and thank you for sharing your wisdom today.
Yeah, thank you for giving me this opportunity.
All right.
Yeah. Thanks for being with us.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, will you help us reach more people by subscribing, sharing the podcast with a friend, and leaving a 5-star review? If you've been inspired by what you've heard today and want to learn more of how you can make a difference for kids in foster care and the foster families where you live, visit americaskidsbelong.org. We depend on individual donors to fund our work. We'd be grateful if you would consider joining us as a monthly donor. Visit americaskidsbelong.org to make your tax-deductible donation. Thank you. Together, we can ensure a family for every child in foster care and a foster-friendly community to ensure every foster family feels loved and supported.